In this hunger course, we've talked about various issues to do with hunger and poverty, world security, all kinds of different concerns and different factors that affect how the most vulnerable live in the world today. Our view was that it would be very helpful if we then bring everything that we've covered in this course now down to a particular country, down to an example of an actual case study. And in this case, we're going to focus on the country of Bangladesh. Now, I've used Bangladesh as an example in a number of the various lectures that we've had so far. You've seen a number of maps, in particular in the discussion of GPS and vulnerability assessment mapping with Professor Alexander. We've picked Bangladesh as an example for a good case study discussion because it's a country that is very, very large in terms of population. The needs are very great. Many donors are there. There's a cooperative government. There's a lot of good results that are achieved. And it's a country that I spent a number of years in as the WFP country director managing these programs, which I'm going to talk to you about. So just keep in mind that we're trying to bring all the various elements of this class now together to talk about how we actually apply them in the case of an agency such as my own in working in a country like Bangladesh. So first off, we have food assistance in Bangladesh, and I want to give you an overall idea of the history. And again, not a history class, but there are many historical aspects of Bangladesh that are useful to just briefly cover. First off, the international community generally first started in Bangladesh at the time of the War of Independence, which was in the early 70s. Some of you may recall that Bangladesh actually used to be East Pakistan. So Pakistan at the time of the partition of the British colonial Raj of India after World War II. There was India, which became India as a country, and then it split to West Pakistan and East Pakistan. And East Pakistan started a war of independence against West Pakistan, and there was a major civil war, internal war in the country that started in the early 70s. And then at independence in 1974, once the war was won and independent Bangladesh became a reality, those of us in the international community became very involved, mainly in a relief mode, because there was major loss of civilian losses, loss of property, and all of us then were very much involved in a rehabilitation phase up until 1980. And then starting in 1990, we were leading then to a development phase, meaning that the country had basically been rebuilt generally. There was rehabilitation that had been quite successful. We were focused more then on development of the country further. And then we divided this idea of enabling development in 1997, of working with communities on their terms to enable their own development. And then overall, for the World Food Program in particular, our current focus is on people living in chronic crisis, those who are the most vulnerable to the frequent occurring natural disasters in the country. You recall this slide that you've seen in other lectures. It's an example I'm fond of using. In this case, it's a good way of explaining how we look at the situation in Bangladesh from a food security point of view. The overall population of the country is 147 million. The land size is comparable to the state of Indiana, for example. So think of the state of Indiana, which is roughly 5 million people, 147 million people, probably about 150 million now, living in the same space. So it's a very crowded country, one of the most densely populated countries in the world. You'll recognize then the poverty line that we consider in all countries. 2,100 kilocalories, 2,100 calories is what we look at as the minimum daily caloric requirement to maintain health. That's the poverty line overall. In Bangladesh, there are 20+ million people living at a level below that, which is 18,000 or 1,800 calories. That is a level that is not sustainable for life longer term. And what that means is that you're not necessarily going to die of famine or hunger. I mean, it's not necessarily that extreme. What happens is that you are not consuming enough calories to sustain your health, and you catch a cold, for example. It may develop to pneumonia, and because of your underlying malnutrition issues and lack of calories on a sustained basis, you may well not survive that common cold. This is a reason, again, why so many people die of hunger per se, where they're not actually dying from lack of food, but the fact that they are living in the chronic hunger situation over many, many years, major stages of their life. And in Bangladesh, an example would be that, as I say, 20 million people are living at that level where they're consuming no more than 1,800 calories per day. So overall, you could say almost half of the population of 147 million in the country are living below the poverty line. It's one of the poorest countries in the world. This other graph here on the right, you've also seen before. It simply explains the correlation and connection between levels of income and the amount of that income that is spent on food. So again, the higher level of income that you are earning, you're going to spend less of your income on food, and as you're earning less, you'll spend more of that income on food. And typically, the bottom billion in a country like Bangladesh are spending 70–80% of their daily income, which may in most cases be no more than $1 a day on average. They're spending that 80 to 70% on food. Just to remind us all, the Food Security Network, this network, again, these are the key concepts of food security. One being simply availability. When you don't have enough food available, it means that you are either not able to produce the food yourself, to grow the food yourself, or you're not having access to that food in that you're not able to grow it, or that you don't have the cash that you need to buy the food in the market. And then the inappropriate food utilization, again, that was the third concept that you've heard us talk about before. Utilization meaning that it's a physical concept, and that in your body you need to be able to physically benefit from the calories and the micronutrients and vitamins that is contained in that food. And if you've got the underlying health issues that we've discussed in this class, you may not be able to take full benefit. And then overall, the underlying issue for the vast majority of those who are affected with availability, access, and utilization is simply the elements of vulnerability we've talked about earlier. Physical and environmental risks, economic and market risks, and social and health risks. And all of these four elements then affect your hunger status. So now that we've reviewed the key elements of food security, I want to bring those down to a national level in the case of Bangladesh. So there's a national deficit of 2.4 million tons of food grain. So that, in this case, that's primarily rice, 9% of the total. Fortunately, in Bangladesh's case, they have a vibrant economy, and they're able to earn the foreign exchange that they need through their trade regime, and they're able to import the food that they then require, that is this deficit, on a commercial basis. In terms of access, there is a lack of income and purchasing power and access to land, as you can well imagine, for the 20 million plus of the ultra-poor that I explained. And the ultra-poor, again, we've defined as those consuming 1,800 calories or less per day. They're primarily women and children, and again, they're spending 80% more or less of their income of that day on their next meal, on food for that day. And then utilization, they're nutritionally lacking calories consumed and poorly utilized by the body due to the poor state of health that the vast majority of the ultra-poor find themselves in. Women and children, they've got long-term chronic hunger issues where they have been chronically malnourished from birth, essentially. It's that downward spiral of poverty and hunger that I've explained in previous lectures, that intergenerational cycle of hunger that is so pervasive in many countries, such as Bangladesh, among the ultra-poor. Give you an idea of vulnerability then. This is a map of the districts most vulnerable to disasters, in this case mainly flooding. So flooding is the first one at the top, and all the blue areas here are the areas where the rivers are coming through. There are two major rivers of Asia, the Brahmaputra and the Ganges, that empty through Bangladesh. Think of it as a large river delta. Think the Mississippi River Delta, for example, but with many, many more people. The good news about that, of course, is that it's one of the most fertile lands, most fertile areas that you'll ever see. There's stories always that you can cut a branch, stick it in the ground, and it grows. It literally will happen. Very, very fertile. So floods are a good thing often because they revitalize the land from season to season. But of course, in a country like Bangladesh, with the pressure of population, there are many people living in places where they're now normally would flood in the past, and they were agricultural areas where now lots of people have to live because they have nowhere else to go. River erosion is a major problem, of course, because of these big rivers coming through, and they flood, and they run over their banks. And then cyclones. And the cyclone areas are the brown areas there on the coast, and those are affected also every cyclone season, and fishing villages are affected and such. So livelihoods in Bangladesh are seriously affected by the extent of flooding every year. And again, to remind us all, flooding is not always a bad thing. It's just that there are too many places, too many people living in the wrong places. And in the case of Bangladesh, again, you've got many of the 20 million that I've talked about, the ultra-poor, living in what are called chors, which is a Bangla word for what we would call in English sandbars. Many of these rivers that I've discussed, because of the way that they flow and the flows change from year to year, major sandbars come and go, and people simply live and set up towns and villages on these sandbars from season to season and hope they won't be washed away. This is a map of the high water at the time of September. This is at the end of monsoon a few years ago. We were living in Dhaka, where our office is right here in the middle of the country, and you can see the amount of water even there. There's water everywhere. When you look at you look at how the poorest survive in these types of situations, remember, many of us would not cope. Many of us would not manage. But in these communities, year after year, people become fairly resilient, fairly able to manage their situations by engaging in various coping strategies. There are various strategies that they develop that are sometimes culturally bound and to do with the resources available to them in their community, and they will do whatever they can simply to get by, to live from day to day. In the case of the ultra-poor in Bangladesh, there's something called distress sales, and that simply means that they will sell whatever assets that they have from day to day, just sell what they've got to feed themselves generally, just to buy food. And oftentimes, remember, in situations where there's a major emergency going on, and these communities are under stress, the food prices will often also be very, very, very high as well, much higher than they're used to paying. So they've even got to sell more of their assets to buy food. And typically this will be furniture, this might be their land in extreme cases, the seeds that they're keeping for the next season to grow, which is a very bad sign for farmers. We know that's one of the key signs that we're often looking at when we monitor and try to understand a situation in a particular region, when the farmers start either consuming their seeds for food or selling them on the open market. The sale of productive assets, this is very similar. This is a distressed sale of their productive assets, which in this case can be a sale of labor oftentimes, or even crops in advance at a cheap rate. So for example, many who are living and working among the ultra-poor communities in Bangladesh are seasonal laborers, seasonal agricultural laborers. And what they will do is mortgage their future labor at the time of distress, that is during the monsoon or during the flooding period after the monsoon, before they're actually in the fields and available to start working. They will go to the landlord, who otherwise will be hiring them in a few months, and ask for in advance on their wages so that they can have some money to feed their families and children, pay their debts. And you can imagine then that the landlord will often agree to pay upfront part of their wages for that agricultural season, but at a much reduced rate. So maybe 50% of their wages. So you can well imagine that this is not a very sustainable practice and is very much to the detriment of the ultra-poor seasonal laborers. And they have so much less asset then at the end of the actual work season. The seasonal migration for employment. What happens here as well is many workers will, these are men in particular in the context of Bangladesh, women generally will not migrate the same way due to many cultural and religious norms. They will stay with the family, they'll stay in the community, in the home. But the man will then migrate often to Dhaka. Dhaka was built for 500,000 people. It's now 22 million people living in Dhaka. It's an extremely overcrowded urban megapolis. New people arriving every day. And this is a major sign of distress for the ultra-poor, because often the man doesn't go back. He's technically supposed to be, in principle, sending money back to the family here and there. Life gets in the way, other relationships might develop, and he may take a second family, a second wife, and this could be a major problem for the family left behind when they lose their major breadwinner. And then finally, what families will also do is in distress, again, they will loan money at very high interest rate, 30, 40, 50%, almost that will be charged on a frequent basis from local money lenders who take advantage of the situation. And what happens is, again, this cycle of poverty simply persists, where people have less and less and less of those few assets that they've been able to build up as they've been eking out in existence in these communities. So for the World Food Programme in Bangladesh, clearly our focus is then on the ultra-poor and how we can help and basically assist the most chronically vulnerable groups from year to year. So that would be 5 million female-headed households who we try to target with the existing resources that we have. Malnourished women and children, 50% of the women and children in Bangladesh, 50% are chronically malnourished. School children, 40% dropout rate at the primary level, so keeping girls in school, getting them to school to begin with, and then keeping them there is a key priority. There's a refugee situation in Bangladesh. These are Rohingyas, who are ethnic Bengalis who have been expelled from Myanmar, Burma, next door, who are living in UN-sponsored refugee camps. There's a conflict-affected zone. This is where indigenous people have lived, and they were in conflict with the central government for many years. There's now a peace plan, and this Chittagong Hill Tracts is a slightly more more hilly area close to the Myanmar border. And then finally, emergency victims from year to year. We will assist with the immediate needs of the victims of floods and typhoons and cyclones. But our biggest challenge overall in a country like Bangladesh is simply to find the food and cash resources to get the job done, which we do together with the government of Bangladesh and the NGO community. Reminding us again that everything that we get from our donors, that we receive as resources, is all done on a voluntary basis.